I promise I only have this
You can
and
ask-
one
I could
more
be here- I- by the way, I
question.
could be here
just
all day.
love
I'm having a
talking
good
to you
time. No,
guys.
please.
We've before you ask a question, we've been very excited to do this interview.
good.
We're big Katie. We get asked for a lot of interviews. We don't really do interviews,
Oh, well,
but we're
thank
very
you.
big fans of you, and
Thank you. I
we were looking
appreciate
forward
it.
to this.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. It's no secret that one of the things that propelled Donald Trump to victory in the last election was right-wing media, a potent combination of conservative cable, podcasts, and social media influencers. Now progressive voices are trying to make sure that their footprint is as powerful and as big. The Meiselas Brothers have created the MeidasTouch Network. That's right, one of the few digital networks to crack the code, gaining millions of followers and even beating Joe Rogan to be the #1 podcast on Apple Podcasts a few months back. So I'm very excited to talk to them about what they're doing and how they're doing it. First of all, hello guys, welcome to Next Question. Thank you so much. An exclusive, the first time the three of you have done an in-person interview together, right?
Absolutely, first
Wow,
time.
I'm very honored and very flattered. And I wanted to ask a little bit about your life story. You all grew up on Long Island. You all had your own respective careers. Ben, what were you doing before you decided to embark on this venture?
Well, I was a lawyer. I went to law school at Georgetown Law, was a civil rights lawyer, and I was working civil rights cases out in the Bakersfield, Fresno area, representing families who lost loved ones in police brutality cases.
Wow.
So it was through that work that I ended up meeting Colin Kaepernick. And Colin Kaepernick took a knee for police brutality to bring attention to it. And then from there, the pandemic happened and the MeidasTouch Network kind of sprung out of it. But my background was a lawyer. I think my parents were surprised when I went into podcasting, but I think they're happy with it now.
I'm sure they are. How about you, Brett? What were you doing?
I was in film and TV, so I moved out to Los Angeles to go to USC, and I was in film school there, and then I graduated, freelanced for a bit, ended up working for the Ellen DeGeneres Show, was an editor there, ran the digital department post-production team over there.
You guys were really early adapters for like digital content. I remember Ellen
Yeah.
doing such an incredible job. So you knew, gosh, a lot of people aren't watching this show at home. We are going to make sure that everyone sees it online.
And I got to give them a lot of credit, and the producers there a lot of credit. They saw that incredibly early on, and what ended up happening was when I got there was a team of like 5 people. I was the new guy. There was like, 4 or 5 other people. By the time I left there, we had a team of, I don't know, if you include, kind of other staff kind of associated with it, probably more like 80 people there. And so I saw this entire division of digital blossom, and I got to be there while it happened. And I never thought that editing and helping to create videos that may be about human interest stories and cat videos and whatever we were doing there would end up apply to making political videos, but somehow I think it ended up being a great education actually in doing that. So.
I'm sure it did. Meanwhile, the baby, Jordy, tell me what you were up to before you got involved in this.
Marketing and advertising, actually right here in New York, heart of Times Square, this agency called Translation. Incredible agency. I like to say that they gave me my PhD in New Age marketing. It was really awesome. It was a nimble operation over there. I think they had less than maybe 80 to 100 employees when I was there. And so you got to wear a lot of different hats. So from the creative department to strategy to account management, just kind of seeing campaigns, taking them from the earliest stages of development and seeing the whole execution all the way through. It was really, really cool. And seeing how they kind of used new age tech and social media to really emphasize and reach their audience in different ways. It was eye-opening at the time.
So you all, your skill sets really complement each other. You all bring something different to the table. And so it's the pandemic. You all are getting increasingly frustrated by what you're watching unfold.
To say the least.
And Ben, what was your aha moment? Like, we have to do more. And how did you all come together and say, let's launch this new venture?
Well, you heard our backgrounds. We're not political people. Missing from those backgrounds was stories of working in politics. We're just people who were scared during the pandemic. We were nervous. We were worried about our families. We were worried about our friends. And we were sending each other text messages about what we were going through. And so we said, how do we translate those messages into we almost felt selfish if we didn't bring what we were talking about to the public. So we just started saying, what if we wrote about this? What if we started a blog? What if we used Brett's skills, who could do videos and editing? What if we used Jordy's marketing skills and just start telling people, here's what we're feeling, here's what we're experiencing, you're not alone, we're a family, and here's what we're trying to do to help each other. So we start releasing a article, a video that Brett edits. Jordy helps coming up with some of the framing of it with his marketing skills. And it seemed to resonate because nobody had really seen a focus on these topics that really focused on the human experience as opposed to just kind of an overtly political side to it. So people had this kind of, aha, like, I feel that way too. And once we started seeing that, the shock to us was like, wait a minute, no one else is really talking like that and connecting in that way. And so we did it again and again and again. And from there, it just kind of kept on growing. A video did 100,000 views, then 1 million views, then 5 million views. And from there, it kind of sprung up and a community started developing around it. And the months progressed and we started seeing that this was actually having a real impact.
And then you sort of broadened your aperture, if you will, and kind of started focusing on all kinds of things, not just obviously COVID and the vaccine or misinformation or how you were feeling and what was upsetting you, but the political spectrum in general, right, Brett?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think we just, we were trying to share our lived experience with everybody out there. And so when we saw something that we thought was crazy, we would just be like, isn't this crazy, everybody, what we're watching together? Like, is it just us? And like, I think for a while we were all just looking at each other like, I don't understand. Like, why is this being treated like this is normal? Especially it was during the time when, Trump was saying there's 15 cases going down to 0. It's never going to come to our shore. It was just lie after lie after lie. And I was like, we were all like, this is going to be bad, right? And then we just kept seeing, all the kind of political ramifications stem from there. I think that was a very kind of pivotal moment in shaping people's beliefs. And in addition to just COVID, I think a lot of people at that point were sort of being siloed into different kind of groups at that point. And there was a deep division that was kind of being kind of put into our society, and people were kind of falling
reinforced by their own self-selection or algorithmically reinforced.
And the fact that everybody was home and everybody was not speaking with each other. And so as we developed this,
mad too. People were pissed.
People were mad for all different reasons. I mean, some people were mad that they had to, be home. Some people were mad that, why don't they just take the vaccine? Why don't they respect my space? People were all mad at each other for all different reasons. And so there were these communities developing. And so community became an essential aspect to us, more so than the politics of, are you able to kind of assemble a community that's based around kind of positivity and wanting to do the right thing, rather than a lot of these sort of more malicious online communities that exist out there that seek to kind of sow division and hatred. And during that time, there was definitely, a lot of that. And so as we built kind of MeidasTouch, the community aspect was almost more important than us saying, here are our political beliefs and here are these political stances, but more like, hey, don't y'all want things to be normal? Like, can't we see that this stuff is freaking nuts? And like, if we could all just rally around that, like maybe we could actually put those political differences aside in many ways. And so as we progressed, one of the things that we saw was that, there were folks who may consider themselves, as liberal as could be joining us. Then there were folks who consider themselves Republicans or former Republicans who were joining us. Independents. We saw, people coming to us for all sorts of reasons. But at the end of the day, I think the core was people just wanting things to be like normal again. Right. And understanding that what we're seeing then, and by the way, what we're still seeing now, is not normal.
I was going to say, I wouldn't necessarily say, and you can correct me if you disagree, that your content exudes positivity at this moment in time. And I feel like you have gone through various iterations. Jordy, during the Biden administration, were you guys a little more dormant? There were fewer things for people of a certain political persuasion, I think, to be outraged about. So did your growth really explode after the election of Donald Trump the second time?
No, I would say we saw our strongest growth period when President Biden was president during that era. I think it's a slight misconception about what we do that, maybe like just angry, at the world or anything like that. We really just try and bring folks facts and data. And it's sort of that approach that has led the community to grow. When you watch our videos, for example, Ben will say a couple sentences, he'll just say, play the clip. Because playing the clip many times is way more effective than Ben explaining every little slight detail and maybe even giving his opinion in that second. If people would just take away the receipts from the videos and we let them form their own opinion, that's where we've genuinely seen the most growth of the network and of the community, because it speaks to really the values that we care about. We just want things to be normal. We just want people to, live their lives and be happy and be able to enjoy it without some, lunatic screaming in their face every 3 seconds. And so I think we've seen tremendous growth during the Biden administration, and we continue to see growth right now as well. But again, I think people are always coming to us for the facts and for the data, and that's what it's allowed it to grow.
I think because we've been there now for about 5 years, people shut off after a lot of people shut off after the last election, and they were looking for fighters, and they were looking for people to stand up to them. And I hope we've always been authentic to those same values when we just started this out in 2020 as what we're doing now. So as we were out there still fighting, and I think a group of people lost a lot of hope after this election. So they turned and they saw what we were doing, and I think that also helped give them hope, which allowed a lot more people to maybe notice what we were doing now. And also we were doing things on the digital realm that a lot of people are adopting now.
Right.
I mean, our YouTube strategy, our focus on simulcasting videos and audio was just a different way to even kind of approach this space, which also I think has been a bit kind of pioneering. And we could talk about that later, but that's part of, I think, where we're seeing, and we're humble and grateful for it, but some of the recognition is, lots of people didn't even know what we were talking about when we were saying simulcast.
Right.
A year ago or more, and now that's the new lingo.
If a Martian landed on Earth and you had to explain to him or her what the MeidasTouch Network is in, an elevator pitch, how would you do it? Who wants to take that?
I mean, I think it's a podcast that's fueled by a community, and the community.
But it's not just podcasts, I guess, as we know, are video and audio, but it's sort of, you're doing everything everywhere all at once, right? But sorry, the Martian interrupted you. Go on.
No, it's the community is built on, I think core values and principles, and that's what's the success. And what we're trying to readjust everybody to remember is that the Martian's I may have lost the Martian in my elevator speech right there, but I'll give you my academic speech to the Martian. Okay. I'm assuming the Martian's
Martian is
academic,
well-educated.
Well-educated Martian, academic.
Ben's a professor here.
Is a professor, so
got a PhD on Mars. Go on.
Exactly. But I think politics has been gamified into you're this team, you're that team, you're angry, yell at each other. And the viewers left a little bit confused. Wait, what's even the issue? And they try to pick what team do I like based on the style of the fight and the style of the debate and who's winning that fight. And that's the split screen cable news, yell. So we try to deconstruct that. And we come with an opinion, and a strong opinion, but we try to root it in a trial lawyer approach. Here's the evidence, here's the exhibit, here's why we feel this way. Agree with us, don't agree with us, but here's what we're grounded in. And so rather than have a 4-minute segment of yelling with 30 seconds of the actual news, we try to root it in 11 to 13 minutes of the facts with opinion, but it's the facts that drive it.
Well, what I would say to the Martian, I would say that, but also one of the things I think you all do so effectively is connect the dots. In this crazy fragmented media landscape, with so much happening, particularly in the early days of the second Trump administration, I think what you do so artfully is you kind of connect, you thread all these things. If an expert's saying this, and then Caroline Levitt is saying that, or someone not a
Caroline.
big fan.
Caroline.
and you're taking all these different things and you're kind of helping people understand in aggregate what all these moments mean.
That's why you're Katie Couric.
No, is that sort of your goal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because we were speaking about this, I think, like just yesterday, that there's so much noise out there. And I think we all thought, if we went back, I don't know, even 10 years ago, but probably more than that, probably thought, oh, with the internet, with digital media, with all this stuff, there's going to be so much information. People are going to be so well informed. People are going to be smarter than ever. They're going to be on top of everything. It's going to be so clear to know what's true and what's fiction. It's clearly like the opposite at this point of what we're seeing. There's such a deluge of information coming at people every single day. So I think one of the things that we do try to do is what you just hit at, which is how do we cut through that noise with a message that's clear, that could resonate, that gets the truth across in the midst of just all of this chaos that's coming every single day. Certainly that's been ramped up since Trump's second administration, where I think part of their strategy is also to flood the zone. I mean,
of course,
you think
Steve
back to
Bannon
what
says
Steve
that.
Bannon, you think back to what Bannon said in 2016 or whenever he made that statement, flood the zone with shit. I don't know if I'm allowed to say
you're
that on the
allowed
show.
to say that. We curse occasionally here.
And that's definitely been their strategy this time around as well. Just do so much that it's almost impossible for an average person to try to keep up with it. But that's one of the things we try to do is really center the conversation on, these are the distractions, these are the important issues, these are the things that are actually going to affect you, your family, your friends, your coworkers. These
or
are the
just
things.
things you really need to understand.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think you're right. I mean, a combination of things is making it so difficult to stay informed. And a story that happened 4 days ago, the country has moved on, and it's like, hey, whatever happened to the Associated Press getting kicked out of the White House press room? And what about all these right-wing media influencers who are now taking over seats that once belonged to legacy media? Would you describe yourselves as journalists, curators, producers, or do you think there isn't really a category for what you do? Jordy, you're smiling. Go ahead.
I've never thought of it like that. I view us as concerned citizens, first and foremost. We just want to
They're building a media empire.
Well, the funny thing about that is, Jordan, I don't mean to...
No, go for it.
When we do we don't do a lot of interviews about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we're actually not that, and I mean this sincerely, reflective on like who we are, because we center the network around the community and around the message to the people. So it is always, interesting sometimes, and lately we don't do a lot of interviews, but sometimes when we're reflecting on like who we are and what does it mean.
But maybe just think about, instead of you guys like as brothers, sort of who is the Meidas Network, right? And I guess it's a lot of things, right?
Yeah, and it's most importantly, it's been built on the community of people in America and frankly people around the world who are concerned about the human condition and experience. That's how I would say it very succinctly. But I think we are a media network. We run a media network filled with some of the best reporters out there. We have a great editorial team that breaks stories. I consider what I do on a day-to-day basis. I'm reporting on the news. We break exclusives. We report on news that happens. And, we try to contextualize everything as best we can. That's how
I'm wondering, could you do what you do without legacy media? In other words, I know you use a lot of clips from MSNBC or Fox or CNN. You use reporting. And then I think you make it understandable. As I said, you cull from a lot of different sources and kind of give people the big picture, at least in a lot of the content I'm looking at. But the big beef, while legacy media gets trashed and everything, is a lot of these content creators and even digital media networks could not do what they do without, with all due respect to the reporters you have, but with this vast array of legacy media organizations that are covering the world, who are interviewing Scott Galloway on CNN or doing something else with some other expert from you might run a clip. So I'm just curious how you feel about that. If legacy media poof went away, I don't think you could do what you're doing.
I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that we find are on social media. It's what
Right,
people are
or hearings on Capitol Hill. I was thinking about that.
You know, so I would say there's maybe 5 to 7% of what we do is maybe commenting on an interview that's on a cable news, legacy news network. But I don't think that drives the network even a small fraction. I mean, the majority of it is people are out there saying things either on social media, on their own TikToks, on their own Instagrams, on their own X accounts or whatever. They're putting press releases
people are
out.
saying things on Capitol Hill, like Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Yeah.
claiming that guy was flipping the bird. Did you? You guys, I'm sure, did a story.
Yeah,
on this.
yeah, we did that. The deceptive photo where Representative Stansberry ended up showing the actual photo.
And
where
then was that
two
her?
fingers.
Who was holding it
I
up
think
behind Marjorie?
I think it was her. Was
It was Marjorie Taylor Greene had the big poster board of the head of USA Fencing.
Right.
Why they brought in USA Fencing, even though they received no federal funding, is because there was a Fox story saying that there was a transgender fencer. So the whole conspiracy is that they wanted to punch down on a marginalized community using the fencing guy. So they showed a photo of the head of USA Fencing in a Doge committee, and he had a peace sign, or he had 2 fingers up, and they edited it out to look like he was giving the camera the middle finger. And they said, look, he's giving you all the middle finger. And then Congresswoman Stansberry said, no, let me show you what the photo is. You know, it's actually a peace sign.
That
So
was
that's-
so crazy, remember? And Marjorie Taylor Greene just hitting
banging
the
the
gavel.
See, but that's the kind of thing, like, to me, I don't care what your politics are. Like, that's not okay. You know, and we should all be able to acknowledge that that's not okay at the end of the day, to do that kind of deception and to try to punch down at people like that. And so I think that's at the heart of, you know, a lot of what we're trying to get across here. But, you know, I think one of the other great examples too, and you know, I think legacy media certainly plays a tremendous role, and I think there are some, you know, excellent reporters out there who do a really, you know, terrific job, and I commend their work, you know, and especially the reporters who are out there in these war zones and reporting on these international stories. You know, I have so much respect for the stuff they do, but I will say also, you know, a lot of the bread and butter of what we've done, especially throughout the past few years also, is looking to like the firsthand documentation ourselves. And so I think one of the great examples, and one of the reasons I think Ben is so good at what he does, is with his background as an attorney. One of the things that we do is we'll go through court filings, for example. And so during all the various court cases over the past few years, and even everything that's happening in the courts right now, because, you know, there's a whole lot of legal stuff happening right now in the various
keeping
courts.
you very busy, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, and we started a whole new channel, Legal AF channel, because we had so many legal stories.
Right.
And so we have a whole channel now specifically dedicated to the legal. But on those, the attorneys are going through the source documents, the court filings. You know, this judge said this, their argument is this, they're analyzing it, and so I think that is at the heart of it. And I think one of the things our format allows us to do that may not be as conducive to a 24-hour news format or a kind of a TV news format is we could go there and we could sit there and we could say, pull up the filing. We could read an 8-page filing, and our audience likes that. It probably doesn't make good TV,
Yeah.
but our audience likes us going through, okay, now let's look at the footnote on page 3 and let's go to the paragraph on page, and they like Ben.
I'd probably turn the channel at that point.
But our audience, you know, likes that because they like seeing what's actually being said, and I think sometimes it's the most revealing rather than, you know, you hearing what I have to say about this topic.
Right.
Let me tell you what the judge actually said here. Let me tell you what the Trump administration's argument actually is here, and then you be the judge of what the truth is.
So fair enough. You guys do a ton of original reporting, and not just on clips, but that you see on cable news. In fact, I thought it was funny. I know that you hired this guy, and he is sort of like, how can I explain him? He's sort of
Talking
like
about Asen?
the truffle.
Asen.
Yes, the truffle sniffing
Oh, yeah.
dog who can figure out like what is going to be the big story and kind of does clip. And I read one of you said something like he's so undervalued as the best cable news producer in the business because in a way you all are setting the agenda for at least more progressive cable news networks, and I would imagine even more conservative ones that are often reacting to more progressive ones, right?
Well, one of the things that we notice, and it's a funny thing to see, is that Asen, who's one of the most brilliant people on the planet.
Yeah, I might have to hire Asen away.
He truly is a savant. When you see what he does with like the 8 screens, and he sits there for like 18 hours a day.
Oh
like,
my God,
it's
is he
real.
mentally ill yet?
And let me just say, he's ours. You can't have him. but he goes through the clips all day long, and he's got an eye for it, and I think it's something you do need an eye for, right? What out of all the things that are said during these congressional hearings, for example, or on the floor of the House, whatever it is on cable news, there's a lot of stuff that isn't newsworthy, that isn't exciting. But for you to be able to capture, contextualize, and 99% of the time he's literally just putting the captions of what people are saying when he puts out these clips. But to pick those moments that are the moments that he knows will be important for people to see, I think that's a real skill and a real talent. And one of the interesting things that we see is he'll do that throughout the day, and then coincidentally, on the primetime shows,
suddenly is talking about it, right?
You go watch
another lawyer, right then.
Whether it's MSNBC or Fox, they're playing those same clips. They have a different perspective on the clips, but they're playing those same clips that Asen pulled earlier in the day. I don't think that's any accident. I think, that's just how people are consuming media.
Right.
And it's not just us, but it's cable news producers as well are seeing what happens in Congress, not because, these hosts are sitting there watching
the hearings
all day, but because they see what people are speaking about online, and oftentimes that originates with our team.
So interesting. You talk about your values. You describe the trans community as a marginalized community. I couldn't agree with you more. I think our values are probably aligned. But clearly you guys are left of center. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that's certainly fair, in the kind of traditional political spectrum and stuff.
If you're thinking about issues that you all care about and believe in,
100%.
Maybe you can describe some of those issues that
and
you care
we all
about.
grew up, not that we grew up, we didn't grow up political, but we were all, Democrats, and we all had beliefs that go in that. But we really don't view everything like through necessarily a political end, like in that way. We don't necessarily view ourselves as like I don't care what the Democratic Party does. I don't care about their internal squabbling. I don't care. To me, we're just doing our thing. And if we have our values, and if people want to meet us at our values, that's kind of all we care about. So,
what are your values?
Look, I think people should get, for a hard day's work or just working, they should get paid with dignity. I think Americans should be able to afford homes. I don't believe Americans should be living paycheck to paycheck if they're working. I think that's a form of psychological torture. I believe that Americans should all have access to health care. It should be very affordable or free for Americans. I believe Americans should have access to education, which should be affordable or free to Americans. I believe in equality. I don't believe that marginalized communities should have to wake up and be scared how they're going to be treated in a given day. I don't believe that people should be bullying marginalized communities. I believe diversity and equality is a strength, and equity is a strength, and I don't think that the lesson from this past election should be running away from that. It should be standing up for it and being strong and standing up for it and showing actual convictions. I think a lot of marginalized communities see fair weather supporters who are with them when it seems cool and then abandon them when the seasons change. And I think they see that a lot in how the media portrays them, how corporations portray them. Oh, everyone's with DEI now and everyone's not with DEI now. I think that's bullshit. I think you got to stand with people and be who you are, and that's ultimately is the right thing to do. But I think that's also what ultimately will win elections too, because if you really care, if you're really fighting for people, they'll recognize that. And I think when they see that you're wavering, they don't even know if you're a real ally or not an ally.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine working with and representing Colin Kaepernick was very transformative. Maybe not transformative, maybe that's not the right word.
For sure.
It was.
It was absolutely.
In terms of how you view things like Black Lives Matter and some of the things that Colin did, and as we were talking about racial equality and DEI issues, and gosh, we've seen so much of that progress reversed. How do you feel about reproductive rights?
Well, first, Colin.
Go ahead.
On the Colin side, nobody wanted to work with us at first when I started representing Colin. Remember that Colin was one of the first people, if not the first person Trump targeted. Get that SOB off the field. Colin lost his job. No one would do deals with us. No one did business with us. And Colin and I were working together then. Then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to work with us because Colin fought. People perceived what everything was as Colin won. He stood up. Everybody was with us. And then people leave. And then they're no longer, we can't do, all these corporations, all these groups, everybody who wanted to invest
and the owners
in.
get scared, right?
And they were all talking about diversity initiative, chief diversity officer, all those things. Then they get rid of them. So if you look at that, you think, who has my back? And I think you need to, as a leader, setting aside, are you center left, are you left, are you left? You just as a leader have to say, I have your back, and I've always had your back. I'm the person who was marching with you in Bakersfield on the streets, whether you were a Democrat or Republican. If you lost a loved one, I was with you, and I was fighting for you. And I'm the civil rights lawyer who was fighting for you. I was the person there. We have your back. And I think that authenticity is what's most important beyond, how do you describe yourself? As it relates to reproductive rights, we feel strongly that reproductive rights, it's a woman's decision. We as men, get the hell out of it. It's not for me to even think for a moment that I should be in any way controlling, lecturing, talking, having anything at all to intrude in the conversation, here. And so for us, women's reproductive rights, that is sacrosanct to the woman. Men, stay the hell out.
So you, I think, are antithetical to the current sort of right-wing media ecosystem. And I want to read a quote from this guy named Michael Tomasky, who is the editor of the New Republic. I interviewed him a few days after the election. And I asked him about his essay about why Trump won. And when exploring why he did, Tomasky wrote, "The answer is the right-wing media. Today, the right-wing media, Fox News and the entire News Corp, Newsmax, One American News Network, the Sinclair Network of radio and TV stations and newspapers, iHeartMedia," not all of iHeartMedia, formerly Clear Channel, the Bot Radio Network, Christian Radio, Elon Musk's X, the huge podcasts like Joe Rogan's and much more, sets the news agenda in this country. He repeated that in the next paragraph, sets the news agenda in this country. And they fed their audiences a diet of slanted and distorted information that made it possible for Trump to win. Before I ask you about how this informed your decision to move forward with the Meidas Network, I'd love to hear your take on why you think, and maybe Jordy, as a marketing person, you have something interesting to say about this. Why has right-wing media been so incredibly effective?
Yep, I think when you go down that list, the Fox Newses, the Rogans, and you keep going down and down.
Not to
Elon
mention
Musk's,
the so-called manosphere and all of those dudes, right?
And we
There's
can get
one
to that
thing
too.
that's really standing out to me every time you go down through one of those lists is who they're funded by. These billionaire, Elon Musk, billionaire, Fox News, Murdoch, billionaire. You go into the Rogan sphere, I don't know his whatnot, but it's heavy funding and influence that then just trickles down into that quote unquote manosphere. And so once you get hit with, the Fox News clips, it's an ecosystem that all feeds into itself. And then the algorithm takes it on your social network. So you really can't escape it. Like it's consuming in such a way that it's almost unavoidable.
Sorry, Brent. I guess one thing.
Go ahead.
People are suffering. People feel pain right now. And people want answers about why they feel pain. They can't afford a home, and they're seeing rich people with 10 jets and mansions, and they can't afford a home. They don't know if they're going to be able to. We have to listen to people and what they're saying. Democrats, listen to what people are actually saying to you. People are suffering out there. And I think that they're getting easy answers from right-wing media about where their suffering is coming from. They're being told the immigrants are doing it to you. They're eating your cats and your dogs. And that sounds stupid to a lot of people, but people want an easy answer about why they're feeling pain. And when you can blame a marginalized community as they're doing it, and then somebody comes in and says, I'm going to make you rich. I'm going to make you the richest person ever, just like me. You're going to be so rich, you're not even going to know what to do with how rich you are. That message resonates with people who are suffering. It's built on fraud. But you combine the lies with a right-wing media network giving you a simple answer, and that connects with people. Now, how do you combat it? You have to combat it by pointing out that that's a lie and that's a fraud, but you also have to provide solutions, and you have to speak to people's real human condition. You have to look somebody in the eye, and you have to say to them, I hear you. I listen to you. I understand what you're going through. And that's when, we could talk about the podcast bros, the media ecosystem, but ultimately, whether this massive funding machine, they're pumping easy answers by scapegoating the other and making people understand, that's why I'm going through this. And that's not why they're going through this. They're going through this because people like Trump and other people are the ones doing it to them, inflicting, that's what's causing it. And they've managed to, the people who are causing it has managed to convince the people they're inflicting the pain on that they're helping them, and they're not. And so the antidote to that is also simple messages.
I was
but
going to say
also
messaging is so important, isn't it, Ben? Because it seems to me there is sort of an orchestrated effort to keep it simple, but also to have it kind of almost echoing throughout the whole ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
In a way that is just much more effective. I think also people think that people are paying attention to every little thing, and they're just hearing sort of this orchestrated effort. I'm not really making sense right now, but I think most people aren't like us, like reading everything, or like your guy who's watching 8 screens,
and
right?
by the way, it is coordinated, and those people you mentioned, they do work together. I'm sure, and I've seen certainly evidence of it. There's been stories about it as well, that there are signal chats and iMessage chats and various things where
this is what we're going to talk about today. Roger Ailes used to do that every morning on Fox News.
And they all blasted out.
Distribute a memo with talking points that every anchor had to adhere to.
One of the things that we noticed early on, and I feel like we were written off for it a lot, is that those conversations were starting on the internet. And they would then permeate to legacy media. They would then get to people's Facebook feeds. They would then get into the conversations that people are having with one another. But you wonder, where does this cats and dogs rumor, where does that even begin from? And you could trace stuff like that back to an internet post, back to a tweet that went viral, that people spoke about. And so oftentimes, because everything is so fragmented right now, you don't actually know where that information even started from, what was the kind of match that ignited it. But oftentimes these conversations are beginning in these spaces, and then they kind of become more mainstream, and in many cases now make their way to the president of the United States, who lives in these spaces as well. But I think, I think it's a bit nefarious kind of how it operates in a way, and I think folks have learned, in my opinion, a lot of the wrong lessons from the election. And by nefarious, I mean, I think people think like these people were created in a lab, that, the Manosphere podcast, that these people were created in a lab designed to spread propaganda and spread certain lies. But to me, that's not what it is. I think a lot of these shows did begin organically, and they had audiences, and they connected with people through typical, life things, or whether it's, ultimate fighting or weightlifting or, discussing a pop culture trial or, whatever it may be, something that doesn't necessarily seem political. But once they have you in, they could then use that space to send people down these other rabbit holes that I think could be, kind of a bit more dangerous, I think, in that way.
So it's like a lifestyle podcast that sort of morphs into.
They suck people in, and then they'd say, okay, now that I got you,
Yep.
have you considered that the vaccine might be hurting you? Like once they get you.
Have you heard of ivermectin?
Yeah, have you heard of, and then all of a sudden you start getting put down this path. I read an interesting article a few years ago at this point, I think it was in the New York Times, and it was about how the Epoch Times, they were
I signed up for that once, and I tried to, because I always like to hear what everybody's saying,
sure.
and how stories are being framed.
Isn't it called
Epoch?
Epic, yeah.
I don't know,
I
but
don't
anyway,
know.
it's like from China or something.
Someone will correct me in the comments.
And and I was like, oh my God, these people are insane.
Yeah.
Stop. And they kept sending me stuff. Finally, they stopped.
And so in this New York Times piece, they analyzed how they pulled people in with viral videos of cats and dogs. And they would promote on Facebook videos of cute cat videos and cute dog videos. And so they would get people to engage with their content because they thought that they were engaging. Oh, look at this cute cat who's on a skateboard or whatever it is. Next thing they know, they're being pushed. Fauci needs to go to prison and all this crazy stuff. And it all started because they watched this video of a dog on a Roomba or something,
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by nefarious, that people could get pulled in with things that seem benign or seem like they're, things that relate to their interests. Next thing they know, they're taken down this algorithmic hellhole, and that they really can't escape from once they're in. And so I think that's one of the kind of dangerous spaces that we're in right now. Also is, social media is going to continue to push stuff at you that you engage with and that it thinks you want to see. And once you do a few clicks, sometimes people get lost in these algorithms and it consumes their life, and they just kind of lose a grip on, a little bit of normalcy and kind of even respect for other people or humanity. And I think that's kind of one of the dangers that we're facing right now. It also kind of programs
you to have this visceral reaction to anything that is different than your point of view.
Yeah.
Right? And I know that you all say the talking point or the conventional wisdom is like the left needs a Joe Rogan. They need their Joe Rogan. And I know you have all said that that's the wrong way to look at it. But clearly, to deal with this ecosystem that is so powerful, different points of view, or even truth, right, needs to have a more potent platform. So how do you think different views or truth and everything that's going on with the Trump administration gets out there and explained to people? And do you worry that you're kind of preaching to the choir? I know I just asked like 12 questions in one, but how do you do that?
Well, on the preaching to the choir, I always ask this question when people, when I ask about Fox, and I said, do you think that Fox News is preaching to the choir? I say, raise your hand if you think Fox News preaches to the choir. And usually in my group, everybody raises their hand and says, of course, they're preaching to a right-wing choir. I go, do you think Fox is one of the more powerful forces in politics in general? Okay, so they're preaching to the choir. You don't view that as a negative, right? Right, okay. Well, what if your choir just needs to sing louder than the other choir? What if you just need a choir to begin with? What if your choir doesn't believe you're a good conductor? You should first be a good conductor of your own choir. This is going back to what I said before, and ensure that your choir knows that you're actually their conductor and that you're fighting for your choir. So I think that whether you want to say it as the Democrats or whoever, I think that one of the problems has been that the choir needed to be preached to a little bit from an authentic position and saying, we're here with you. We're fighting for you. And then you can start to build and grow because I think other people start to see, wait a minute, that makes sense.
Your choir needed a church to go to.
They needed a place.
Basically,
Yeah,
right?
you know, and to me, when you're building, do you want to model that on a choir built upon values that you don't think are helpful? And this goes to your Rogan question. I'm going to tie it all together. But do you want to then say we should be like that? Well, you're going to start losing people in your choir if you're saying I want to start acting that way, because then they're going to go, whoa, what do you mean? I don't like the way they're treating marginalized. I don't like the way they're bullying. I don't like the way that they're making a mockery of women. I don't like that. So why do you want to be like that? No, I think that they just want to see you say, this is what I believe in. I'll give you an example. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky.
I just interviewed him on
Great.
Friday.
It's great, right?
Oh my God. He is, talk about wholesome and all-American. He's like out of central casting. It's like Andy Beshear, Rush chairman.
100%. Democratic governor.
68% approval rate in Kentucky.
68 in Kentucky. He doesn't say, I'm not for LGBTQ rights. He says the opposite. He vetoes any bill that comes his way that's anti-LGBTQ, and then he does a press conference, and he'll say, this is why I'm vetoing it. We need to treat all human beings with respect. And they respect him in Kentucky for doing that. So to me, if he can do that in Kentucky, we should be able to do that everywhere else. And to me, that's a great example. I was so impressed in the interview I did with him where he conveyed, that message to me. So there's that. And then there's what Senator Bernie Sanders said to me, which is that the most important issues are sometimes the least discussed. And that's true. People aren't talking about the issues that actually impact us the most, whether that's housing, whether that's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's, living paycheck to paycheck, and all of these issues are not being discussed. So we should discuss them. So to me, in terms of building what our version of what's going on the other side should be, I think it's obvious. We should make sure our choir sings louder, and we should be focusing on the issues that actually occupy a lot of the mental space in Americans' minds, but are filled with conspiracies, and we should fill it with the truth and solutions.
And what is the reaction among, say, people who are more conservative? Because everyone's all over the place, and you see, like, working class folks who supported Donald Trump. But if you're tackling the issues they care about, do you find that they are gravitating toward your platform?
Yeah, look.
Or not?
I think, I'll say this, whether they're gravitating or not gravitating, I'm confident that the views and values, I stand behind them. I stand on business and I stand behind them. And I'm confident that that's the approach that will, I'm not trying to chase people and beg them to be good people. I'm simply want to let them know that here's a place where we feel very strongly about these things. There's a massive community now of millions of people who watch this. Join it if you want to join it. Don't join it if you don't want to join it. But we are here, and we're standing strong what we believe in. So I don't. It may sound. I don't occupy myself so much thinking about. I'm really hoping that I've just changed. Mr. MAGA's mind and made him into a Mr. Meidas. Like, if they want to live in their rage algorithm,
Meidas Mighty.
Yeah, if they want to live in their
Meidas Mighty, the best.
If they want to live in their rage algorithm, then that's where they could live. But they should know that there's other places where we're going to talk about the issues in an impactful, logical, smart way, and then we're going to layer that with some positivity to your day.
Do you feel that this whole kind of opposite views of, the Foxes of the world are in aggregate gaining traction? You have, for example, Pod Save America, you have Courier Newsroom, you have a lot of these digital companies, networks, honestly. I know you call yourself a network, but they're networks too, kind of rising up and creating a force field that is, bumping up against this other huge ecosystem. Did that make sense?
It does. And I just gave you the data quickly, from our network. 350 million or so YouTube views every single month.
I'm very jealous.
So that's more. So that's more.
We're all like, what's going on? Yeah.
But that's more on a day-to-day basis on digital, and I think we all agree things are moving digital. So the cable news wants to go more digital.
Right.
So
But
they're
it's-
in
it
our
took forever. I was like, what is wrong with you people? But
so,
anyway, go
so
on.
on that platform, the MeidasTouch Network, on a day-to-day basis, and some days Fox beats us, but on a day-to-day basis, we'll get more views than Fox on YouTube. And then CNN, MSNBC, and all the rest, MeidasTouch Network will beat those. We're the fastest growing Substack right now of all Substacks
I'm
out there.
joining Substack after Memorial Day.
So we should do.
Yeah,
We
definitely.
should do a lot of
That
stuff
would be
together.
fun.
And we love Substack.
Now that we're all such good friends.
Exactly. Exactly. And then, across, and then on the podcast downloads themselves, Jordy showed me the data today.
Mm-hmm.
So in the last month, the MeidasTouch Network beat Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk, and Ben Shapiro all combined for the last month.
As they do at sorority
So,
meetings.
so in terms of growth, I think that shows that there is an appetite for this out there, and I think that we got to preach to that choir, and expand it. But let's start also with fortifying the choir and let them know we care about them.
Yeah.
I'm curious, because I've struggled with this as someone who you grew up watching, I'm sure, and it started in very
100%.
traditional mainstream media. Now pointing out the facts and what is really happening is automatically interpreted as being biased.
Right.
And of course, I think there's no such thing as true objectivity. But having said that, I really struggle with that. And many people say, listen, the rules have changed. It's okay to say you support trans people. It's okay that you say, I am 100% for reproductive rights. All these things that honestly, personally, I hold dear.
Yeah.
But professionally, I've never really, I've been
Right.
trained to not share that. So I'm curious if you think sort of old-fashioned, semi-objective, knowing that pure objectivity is impossible, that kind of journalism still has a place in the culture, or is it simply, the 75 and up people who are watching the network evening newscasts?
I'm with you on that opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it still has a place. But at the same time, I think everything is so fragmented now that I think such a large portion of the audience are going to places that share a point of view. And I think, I think if we just did a report that is this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. I mean, there's plenty of places where people, could find,
Not really. I
that-
mean, fewer and fewer, right, Brett?
Yeah, but I think I think the key thing that we do is connect the dots on all those things, and I think when you're able to weave it into a story and actually connect the dots, I think that's what people want to be able to gain clarity on, because I think as we've kind of been saying, there's so much information out there that in order to be able to digest it, it has to be presented, I think in many ways, in certain ways, just to make it clear from even just a storytelling perspective, so people get how does a tariff affect their business or the price they're going to pay for goods, and how does this affect their medication and their like I think you need to be able to tie it all together in a way, and whether people think it's biased or not when you're speaking on those issues, to me, I think you just need to put that aside, because now we live in a time when people are going to comment on everything, right? Like I said, if people are going to comment, I mispronounced something, we'll get a comment, right? There's going to be a comment about everything. You have to almost bake that into what you're doing, in my opinion, and just be you, and let the chips fall where they may. I think the biggest thing that you need to do, though, is be authentic, to yourself. And I think people could smell bullshit from a mile away. And that's why I think when after the 2024 election, when there were so many, I feel like I saw so many Democratic politicians and people in media and podcasts and you name it, to all of a sudden everything I thought they believed in and the communities that I thought they supported, all of a sudden they seem to be backtracking on that. Maybe we focused a little too much on inclusivity. Maybe we focused a little too much on reproductive rights. And when you try to kind of shape your opinions based around public polling,
right, and kind of like
and
that,
kind of see
what
where
you
the
were
wind
describing
blows.
as the DEI
Yeah.
people who, when it was cool, it was great, and now they're like, what does that stand for?
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
how do I trust you with anything? And I don't. Speaking of Mr. MAGA, Mrs. Meidas, whatever we were talking about before, I don't think you're gonna win. The Mr. MAGA is not gonna vote for you because you have those beliefs. They're gonna vote for the MAGA guy. Okay, they're not gonna come around. They may say they respect you more or something. You're not getting their vote. I assure you. And you're just alienating your choir, as we were speaking about before, and you're angering the people who you've built trust with because you violated that trust. So I think right now, and I think whether you're MeidasTouch or whether you're Joe Rogan or you name it, I think the most important thing is that you're authentic to your audience and that people trust the things that you are saying and know where you are coming from and know that tomorrow if a poll comes out that says this big thing you've been pushing may not be super popular right now, that you're not all of a sudden going to just change your beliefs, based on it. And that's my thought on that. I think, one of the things I could say about Donald Trump, I'm not trying to say anything nice about the guy right now, but one of the things I could say is I think he's pushed forward a lot with things that are incredibly unpopular, and then he's taken his people kind of on that journey with him, going way back. I mean, remember, he was being laughed at these debates, at the White House dinner. I mean, everyone is making a mockery of him, but he pushed forward and he tried to make the case to bring people to his side. And
He is a marketing genius, don't you think, Jordy, in a way?
I would say he's a Ponzi schemer and a fraud.
There you go. That's a
but
good characterization.
Yeah.
I mean, you
That's what I was looking
can
for.
think dialectically. He can be all those things, can he?
Was Bernie Madoff a good marketer?
Well, I
He'd
think
take a lot of
he's
people.
I think he was very. I don't think he had a public persona that was charismatic and got people to buy what he was selling. I mean, he did have a small group, right? But I don't know. Just on we don't have to get into this debate.
I think what Brett was saying, though, too, about audiences these days, and it's a marketing buzzword, authenticity. I know I used to say it a lot back in my marketing days. But genuinely, I think people are viewing what we're doing here at the MeidasTouch Network as absolutely authentic. We're three brothers. We don't try and be anything that we're not, right? We rely on Ben for the legal, Brett for the digital, and me for the marketing, and then we bring in experts in specific spaces that could speak to issues that we're not experts in.
Yeah.
And we don't pretend that we're experts in, but we have a clear value set of, right or wrong. And if those lean more democratic, well, I think that tells you kind of where we are as a country, as a society. And we just stand behind it wholeheartedly. And I think people like that. I think that's what folks are gravitating.
Yeah.
By the way, that's not to say that your ideas cannot evolve, that you cannot change your opinions. I think certainly you can. And I don't think with your beliefs that you had at age 18 have to be the beliefs that you have at age 50.
Right.
I think that evolution is a part of life. Exploring new ideas, engaging with them, changing your mind is a part of life. But I think people, to your point, know when you go, oh, this poll came out yesterday, and all of a sudden maybe I shouldn't support transgender people so much. Maybe I shouldn't support diversity. Maybe I shouldn't support reproductive rights. I think people see right through that crap, and then they go, this person, so you're just a fraud. How do I trust that anything else you're telling me right now? How do I know you're being honest about that? What if tomorrow, some other politician won that was the opposite of that, and then all of a sudden you're switching your beliefs on that too? Like, how do you trust somebody, who's sort of a shapeshifter like that? And I think it's important to not view, as you go from election to election or, issue to issue, whatever it is, that you don't just change with the way the wind is blowing, but that you are staying true through those moments and that you're sticking up for your beliefs. Because I think at least people will respect you,
right,
for
and
that.
giving them facts and data that actually reinforces your position.
Yeah.
I think that's really critical. Just a few more questions. I could talk to you guys for hours. We'll have to do it over a beer sometime.
Yes,
please.
But I'd love to know, just sort of logistically, selfishly, a little about the secret sauce that has made you so successful. You guys have hired a bunch of different. It's interesting. I didn't realize Michael Cohen was part of your network. You know, the former Trump lawyer. But you have hired a lot of different people. You have correspondents, but you also have sort of what might traditionally be called pundits. And do you ever feel like you've got too much content that's coming out, or how do you kind of organize what you're doing?
So we've taken the 24-hour cable news cycle and we've tried to deconstruct it. So whereas a 24-hour cable news cycle, you'll have how many stories in a given day? 5 to 7 that are on repeat every day. So we try to take those 5 to 7 stories that, and I don't watch what cable news is, those 5 to 7. We program it based on what we think are the most important, say 7 to 10 stories of the day. And then that becomes basically 10 to 12 YouTube videos, you know, every day from,
Wow.
you know, and
From all your different contributors,
Yeah.
right? Because you do some, right? And do you
Yeah, I'll do occasional
Oh, yes,
ones,
I see you
yeah.
too. Jordy,
Every now and then.
Every now
more,
and
more
then,
so
but-
social. They
Yeah,
do
yeah.
more of the long form stuff.
So every day we probably have about 1 or 2, some days 3 live shows that last about an hour. And so that may be the show I do with Brett and Jordy. That may be a show called Legal AF that I do with a guy named Michael Popak and Karen Friedman Agnifilo, and she was the number 2 DA in the, you know,
right?
these are like
what does
top
AF
lawyers.
stand for? I'm kidding.
No. It means analysis friends.
By the way, that's
Legal-
super
legal
insider.
analysis.
Is that true?
It does.
Analysis friends. Some people.
It could be a play on something else, but it's analysis
Okay.
friends.
Okay,
Right,
thank you for
Get your mind
clarifying
out of the gutter.
that. Sorry.
And so about 10 videos to 12 videos a day that are about 10 to 15 minutes and whatever it takes to go through a court filing or to provide all of the data where we feel that we've covered the issue in a way that people really get. So we do that 12 times a day. Maybe there's a 4 a.m., although now that I'm on East Coast time, it's all screwed up. But on the West Coast, it's a 4, a 5:30, a 7, you know, and you basically go 90 minutes out and you program it like that with 2 or 3 live shows a day. And some days, maybe on the weekend, it's 1 live show. And then we have our other social media built around it. So we've got the TikTok, we've got the Instagram, we've got all those at the Blue Sky, which our accounts do very well on as well. And then the audio podcast as well has the Main Brother podcast and maybe a few selective, you know,
You guys
videos.
ever sleep?
Yeah. We don't
And
try.
how do you make money off all this stuff? Because that has been, of course, the big dilemma for people who have transferred to kind of a pure digital
Yeah.
platform. They used to talk about analog dollars and digital pennies. So that's changed as more than 50% of people are now getting their news and information from social media.
Yeah.
But what is your financial model?
I think it's still analog dollars, digital pennies, although the analog dollars
Right.
are getting a little bit
the
less, and the
digital
digital pennies are getting more, which is a good thing. I just spoke recently at a panel, and I said one of the most important things I think to monetizing it is you don't go in it to monetizing it. I mean, truly, we never went into this thinking, how do we make the biggest business decisions? That naturally grew out of building good content and a good base.
And a big community.
Yeah.
And then the community, exactly. And the community was there, and that's what we fought for always, and stood by the community, built the community, and they built us. It's been, very mutual. And then as you grow that, then you start to get into your digital pennies, analog dollars, and you start to look at, what's a YouTube CPM, which has a different name for it, and what's a podcast CPM, and then and then what's a host read CPM, and then you start getting into conversations that start to, not fully are, but start to look similar to the way traditional TV viewed things. What's a CPM, and here's where things are moving, I think. Right now, if you were to buy an ad, a 30-second or 60-second spot on a cable news network, your CPM would be super high for 30 seconds, and you may be paying an they'll say it's a good, the networks will say it makes sense, but you'll be paying whatever X dollars for that 30 seconds. After the show airs, no one sees the ad again, and you're one of 5 ads that may be during that block, or 4 ads during that block, and no one ever sees it again. And I don't know what the conversion rate even is for, because it's not even really tracked that way. How many people bought a car based on
those vitamins that taste like vegetables.
Right.
That's all I see on Fox News.
So if we're getting a million views, on a video, and then there's a host read, and Jordy, works with the advertisers to make sure we're getting advertisers that kind of meet our criteria, and we're not bringing advertisers that we think are not the right fits for us. You start thinking about, well, what does that CPM look like? And, I think it's a more valuable proposition ultimately to an advertiser down the road. And I think this is where the industry's moving. And I think this is why we see so many people looking at a model, that I think we, and again, there's been a lot of people involved in this, but I think that we've helped, show that this is a viable path for one of the first, and people are seeing it and saying, oh, got it, I see how Meidas did it, let me try to build a network. And that's kind of how we, how we think about things there.
It's interesting. Over the past few years since we've been doing this, we've seen a lot of companies kind of come and go, try to enter the space. And I think the theme that I've seen in the ones that have kind of come and gone quickly are the ones that start with a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach. And by that I mean, you see this big splashy announcement, so-and-so was, the editor-in-chief of such and such, newspaper, and now they're going to make the digital network for the future, and they got an $80 million investment, and they're going to open up 12 offices around the world, and they're going to hire 150 staff, and anytime I see that, I give them a year. The economics aren't going to even work. The offices alone are going to sink you. Like I don't even understand how
because it's still dollar penny. It's still dollar. It's still analog
and
dollar.
So like to me, I'm like, I don't even know how this is. How you think this is going to work? But
so how many people do you have altogether on your team?
So I think one of the things that is most effective about what we've done here is the way we've decentralized it. So, I think as far as like kind of full-time staff is concerned, at this point we're probably 10 to 15, like full-time, like, and then in addition to that, though, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of contributors who are also producing content, and contractors and people like that. So
it's their side hustle kind of, or is it?
For some people,
contributors?
It's one of those things where you get what you put into it. And so there are some folks who are, making videos every day, doing 2 a day, are just really crushing it, and this is like become their main thing. And now their livelihood is making, videos for MeidasTouch, which I think is amazing that we're able to, offer that to folks. And then we may have folks who do, a video a month, or a couple videos a month, and this will be their side thing. And so I think we offer that flexibility to folks, who work with us, to kind of how much do you want to put into it, and what's kind of resonating with folks. But I think it's cool that we've been able to build this platform from the ground up, completely independently, without a penny of outside investment money, getting us to where we are, right now.
No, it's really impressive.
And so, and obviously, we were certainly afforded, privileges of, all having jobs and being able to take this leap that other folks aren't necessarily able to do, and I completely acknowledge that. But I think it's important that, you do have that kind of ground up approach when you approach it, because when you're dealing with pennies, you can't be spending, can't be spending dollars. You need to figure out a way to do this. And I'll also go back to our roots here. I'll take it back to the beginning, because during the pandemic, one of the things that we noticed was everyone was recording from their homes. And so we would watch CNN, we would watch, NBC, we'd watch all the networks. Everyone was on Skype or Zoom or whatever. And so we were like, we could do that.
Yeah.
We have Skype.
Reset the
Well,
plane.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
As somebody who, used to have hair and makeup every morning or night and be on a fancy, desk with lights and camera crews and everything. And I'm like, there's something great too about the immediacy. Like, we'd have to call somebody and get them in a car and
Yeah.
have them come to the studio. And there's something great about just being able to talk to someone right away if
And
it's
by the way, there's a
breaking news
rawness
story.
to it. There's an authenticity to it. Also,
There's a scariness
believe
to it
there's
when people see me without makeup.
I totally do not think that, but I think though it requires you to think a little differently, right? You don't necessarily, I know, and I think Ben knows, he doesn't have necessarily a studio, music, all this stuff lifting him up, and so he has to in many ways focus on the content.
Right,
and
and there's a fakiness about, like, good evening.
Yeah,
And
and I think people see through a lot of that, and so in doing it in that way, I think ultimately, like, if anyone is like watching this and like, how do I start something like this? Like, you want to make sure your sound is good. You want to make sure people can see you okay. You want a good camera, good audio. Aside from that, people are going to be actually pretty forgiving with the rest of the stuff. And I think in the beginning also, there were so many people who would come to us, I got this great video, I got this great painting, I just need to run it through a few weeks of testing, and then we're going to make some changes, and then if I could just get an investor,
You just
I need
do
to
it
find
in
a
real
distributor.
time. And that's the one question I also wanted to ask you. You do it in real time, you experiment, you get kind of the reaction.
Yeah.
I promise I only have this
can
and
ask-
then one
I could
more
be- I- by the way, I
question.
could be here all
just
day.
love
I'm having a
talking
good
to you
time. No,
guys.
We've before you ask a question, we've been very excited to do this interview. We're big Katie. We get asked for a lot of interviews. We don't really do interviews,
Oh, well,
but we're
thank
very
you.
big fans of you, and
Thank you. I
we were looking
appreciate
forward
it.
to this.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. But when you talked about how responsive you guys are to your community,
Yeah.
and I'm curious. I love the interactivity. It's not always fun to read because when you read a mean comment or whatever. But tell me what that actually means, being responsive to your community. Can you give me sort of an example of that?
I'll give you an example of the message that resonated and how we do it. If you looked at Senator Bernie Sanders and AOC's rallies recently, where there have been 30,000 people and 15,000, there's a part of it where they go into the audience and they ask the audience, how do you feel about this? And then they just listen. And you hear what the people are saying. And we do something intuitively similar for the past 5 years, where we want to know how they're feeling, what they're thinking about issues, and really listen and learn from their experiences. And that's where we understand, okay, this is what you're going through, this is what you're going through, this is what you're experiencing. And so we have that sense in our overall programming where they are. And another
What is it, reading like their comments, or do you have a special site or email address where you actually hear from people? How do you do that?
It's all of the above. I mean, it's reading the comments. We hold sometimes 1-2 times a month, we'll hold meetings with our supporters and with the Meidas Mighty, as we call them, and we'll do Zoom chats, and they'll tell us how they're feeling. They'll explain to us on our social media handles. They'll usually, at us on certain things, and so it's an aggregate of all of that, and we're just constantly listening to them every day. It's not necessary. We have those meetings, but it is kind of a constant back and forth since this started. Now, just another example is when we started covering Canadian politics, which was a big and our expansion
from a lot of Canadians
internationally. But we listened and listened and listened, and a lot of American media networks supplant the Canadian experience with their American-centric views of how Canada is versus really listening to what people in Canada are experiencing. And so before we started doing any reporting on Canada, we had to understand the dynamics of the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party and the NDP and the Green Party and how things work and what's going on with Carney and what's going on with Pierre Poilievre, and understanding, all of those dynamics. And it was a relentless listening experience. And then we started talking about it, and then it started connecting in Canada. So the MeidasTouch Network podcast became the most listened to podcast in Canada about Canadian politics.
Right.
And what we heard from them
Which is such a compliment,
which,
right?
which told us that, but the feedback there was, it's because you're listening to us, and you understand that when Donald Trump is making these threats against us, it's not a joke, nor do we view it as a trade war. We view it as a war. we view that type of language the same way that Ukraine views Putin talking about denazification, is how when he uses language 51st state, it's an attack on our very existence and our sovereignty. So we want you to understand why it is we're boycotting American products. And it's not that we don't like Americans, it's that the leader of your country right now is basically threatening an invasion against us. And so when you start speaking like that, they go, thank you. You know, they go, our local media doesn't even talk about it in those terms, and that's how we felt.
Yeah, it's obvious that you have an audience first mentality, and it is surprising to me as somebody who's been doing this a long time how all these interactive tools are at our fingertips, and still most media organizations really don't utilize them. Not to blow my own horn for a nanosecond, but when I wrote about this in my book. Sorry, everybody who works with me, because they've heard the story a million times. But when I was doing the CBS Evening News, I was covering the Gulf oil spill. And I said, what do you guys want to know about the Gulf oil spill? That, you know, because I think you get in a media cycle or a news cycle and you kind of repeat the same thing over and over again, or you give a little bit more, advance the story in a small way. But you kind of miss the forest for the trees sometimes. So I asked on Twitter back then, you know, what are your questions about what's going on in the Gulf? And the people at CBS were so unnerved by me trying to understand what people cared about, what they wanted to know, and what they were thinking and what they were wondering about. But to me, if you're serving an audience, why wouldn't you listen to them? And I think, Brett, you were talking about the top-down approach and kind of serve your audience at where they are and what they want to know instead of what you think they should be told, right?
Yeah, and whether you're a politician or a reporter or you're selling tires, or I don't care what it is that you're doing, if you don't understand what people want and what people are looking for from you, you know, I think you're going to miss it. And you're right, you know, now more than ever, people are going to let you know what they think. You know, they're not shy about it.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. They're not exactly shy about it.
I always used to say the good thing about the internet is everyone now has a voice. The bad thing about the internet is everyone now has a voice.
Yeah, so I mean, people aren't shy about it, and you know, and people may disagree with us too at times, you know, but at least we know, you know, what they're thinking, and at least they know that we're coming from a place of like, this is what we really believe in it, and we're not going to BS you, you know, on it. And I think that's kind of the most important.
Corporate news took surgery.
Yeah, no, from my perspective, I don't think the MeidasTouch Network exists at the scale that it does now without our audience, without the Meidas Mighty, and without that relentless relationship of listening and feedback that we have every second of the day.
Yeah.
We read everything, again, for better or for worse.
I don't know how you
we
all
read
have time to do all
everything.
this, but I'm glad you do.
Because it's very important for us that we really understand how our audience is feeling. And they were with us 5 years ago when I moved back into my mom's basement during the lockdown. Yep, doing it from there. To now I have a kid and I'm living with my wife in Pittsburgh. And so they've seen us mature and the network mature every step of the way, and it's really been this familial relationship that we've been able to foster through these years.
And the walls have been broken. You know, I think there still is this sort of artifice about a lot of mainstream media and the way they communicate with people. And obviously you all have tapped into the A word, authenticity, which I think it's overused, but I think it actually still holds.
Yeah. It's one of those cliche for a reason, sort of, you know, sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been one of the reasons I've been successful professionally is I think people think that I'm the same on camera as I am off, which I am most of the time. You know, I'm not fully unfiltered when I do things, and maybe I should be a little less, you know, or more unfiltered. But before we go, I want to, we've kind of mentioned the manosphere and young men in this country. How old are you, Ben?
40.
40?
Well, Ben's about to be 40.
Oh,
he's
happy
got a few days. You're overselling.
I don't know when's this is going to air.
Okay, you're right.
I'm thinking
on
that
Thursday. So,
okay, I'm right on the cusp.
Okay. How old are you?
I needed to stay.
35.
You know,
so 40, 35,
32.
32. Do you all have any sisters?
We do.
Yeah, we do.
You do.
Yeah.
Why aren't they involved in this enterprise? No
She's in
offense,
co- she's in
but
co-
it's,
she
you
will.
know,
She will. She's in college.
Oh,
But
she's
she will
in
be.
college.
Yeah.
Oh wow, she was okay. Okay, you say you're bros, but you're not bros, right? And you know, tell me about what you think is happening to younger men in this country, both really primarily Gen Z, and how they have gravitated so enthusiastically to Republican, to MAGA politics, and how, well, first of all, I want to know why you think this has happened, and then I want to know what you think can be done to change those dynamics.
I think the idea of alpha has been hijacked by the least alpha people in the world. Okay, like a J.D. Vance who's saying, "Oh, my masculinity is under attack." Okay, that's not an alpha thing to say. Like, let's be very clear. When I hear stuff like that, I'm like, well, what do your masculinity? This is what you think about, that your masculinity is under attack? What the hell are you talking about? You know, all of this, like, you know, whining that I hear from these MAGA, "Oh my God, you're coming after me."
Oh, my friend Joanne Lippman wrote a whole essay about that.
You know,
got doxxed and attacked. It was awful. I'm going to send it to you guys.
All of that. When I grew up, I don't like the term alpha in general. It's a word, you know, you're an alpha, you know. But to me, at least as I was raised, you know, being a good guy or good person, but you stand up for people. To me, like the cool kid or the growing up, when I was in high school, what now would be considered that, you would stand up against the bully. The bully wasn't like the alpha person. The bully was like the loser, you know, and like, why are you bullying these people? Like, you would want to stand up for people. And that's, to me, what was always viewed as like cool, and how, you know, at least how I was raised. And being a good man to me is being a man of your word, being someone of honor, again, standing up for people. And that's kind of been, you know, inverted with this, to me, this corrosive culture that has, you know, basically said the opposite, that the bullies and the people who punch down, that's been viewed right now as like what it is, and it shouldn't be that way.
I guess it's because of Trump, really, isn't it? The way he speaks and the way he talks and the way he demeans people, suddenly that has
and probably the way he's also been
cool.
rewarded for it in so many ways. You know, it's funny when you speak about that, I think it's in 21 Jump Street. There's a scene in the movie, where Channing Tatum, where they go to the high school and they try to be cool as they knew it, like in the 80s, and tried to be like kind of the bullies and stuff, and they're looked down upon as like, nah. Like, we're not into that anymore. Like, what are you doing? Like, this weird stuff. And I feel like I grew up the same way. But I think that too many people are looking at Gen Z or Gen Alpha right now as being molded and kind of set in certain ways, and that this election was a reflection on who they are now and who they're always going to be. But
I do think they're being molded by some of these Christian nationalists
100%. I think they're having
anti-women's empowerment bros, right?
I think 100%. But I don't think that's something that is going to be like concrete in them necessarily. I think people have their lived experiences, and I think one of the interesting things that we've even seen in the past few months since Trump has taken office is when you look at a lot of those public opinion polls of Gen Z, they've completely flipped on their head. And polls that show Gen Z, even are supporting Trump back in November or December, now it's something like 68, 20 something, in the opposite direction. So you see how even, those shifts could happen. And I think when people even go out into the world and have experiences and have jobs and need to, afford medication and need to, help their mom who's on Social Security, and they see these real world things that have been kind of gamified in this kind of manosphere world, and that have kind of been stripped from them. I think the reality wakes them up a little bit.
Do you think, because I feel like they're still watching the same people and still getting the same information, and unless those people are flipping or changing or abandoning this administration and what they're doing, they're going to be steadfast.
Yeah, I don't think they're locked in. Maybe I have too much faith, but
I think you have to look at going back to where we almost started, right? I think you have to look at the root cause, which is how was this group able to be kind of preyed upon by, in my opinion, these types of fraudsters and people who push this. And it's because, I think a lot of young people and young men are scared that they're not going to have a future.
Right.
And I think it stems from their weakness, and that other people can prey on it because they're worried that am I gonna have a job? Am I gonna be able to afford a home? Can I bring someone on a date and afford to even pay for it? What's my future gonna look like?
But it's also more than that to me, Ben. It's sort of, women are making all these strides, right? There are more women in college and law school than there are men. Or, gosh, DEI programs are giving unfair advantages, or affirmative action or diversity programs in colleges, or whatever you want to talk about. I mean, I've seen it play out in my own life among people I know, and they think when other people do well, they do less well, right? And so there's just been this tremendous backlash. And to your point, like a lot of whining, like, oh, poor us, and playing the victim for a lot of young white men.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, people are exploiting that. But how do you reverse it? How do you get people to think differently and to see that this is, because I do think they're having some real world effects.
Well, I think you can't solve that by trying to imitate it. You just become a worse version of something that's not already good, which is why the learning experience of, the left needs to find a Rogan is the wrong advice, because you want to become someone who's already kind of preying on these communities.
So what does that mean exactly?
So you have to be a voice that is a fighter. I mean, you have to go back to, you have to be a doer. You have to be someone who actually accomplishes things and says, here's what I stand for. I mean, here are the views and values. It's not a zero-sum game, you against other groups and marginalized communities taking that's not it. That's a pathetic way. You know who deals with that? Whiners deal with that. Like people who are losers deal with that. You want to be a winner? Let's work hard. Let's focus on being entrepreneurial. Let's focus on actually building things versus destroying things and ripping things apart.
Or just
you want to be
complaining,
step up,
right?
Step up.
Yeah.
Step up and I'm not gonna be. When I talk to sometimes my I lecture in undergrad. I have a big class. The semester's wrapped up, but at the end of the semester too, sometimes I like to reflect on the way that I don't know what the class's political views, and I don't inject my political views ever in the class, but I do talk about how I have white kids, black kids, Latina kids, Asian students in my class, men, women, trans in my class. No one in my class ever thinks it's acceptable during the class to say, oh, look at you, this race, look at you, this person, look at you, this person, I don't like you, I don't like you. I mean, could you imagine what would happen in a class if everybody was interacting and treating each other like that? No, we act professional. There's a professor. We go through the semester. We get along. The diversity in the class, the different views, that made the class a more powerful experience. And we were all happy with it. So as I end the semester, I always go to them, so why, when we leave this classroom and go into now a political setting or a professional setting, now we're supposed to all of a sudden take this and now fight each other and now not like each other? We saw the strength of what made this class of 105 people strong. It was the very diverse, we all liked each other. So go out there and remember that this was a valuable experience for all of us, and that should be what the real world was, and that's what we should be fighting for. Not to see in the halls of Congress them not letting people in bathrooms. Like, what are they even doing? I mean, it's
Nancy Mace has lost her mind.
Yeah, she was somebody who a few years ago, kind of pretended to be an ally, and she's now the biggest voice, against
All
it.
she does is selfies in bathrooms.
It's like weird, right? It's like
60 times a day.
It's like you're on
posting
vacation.
60 times a day about any topic at all. Even like a hobby would be strange. I mean, yet alone, like this is what you occupy your time with, and that's how I try to flip it on them. More than I'm like, this is what you're focused on. Like, you wake up thinking about bathrooms all day. This is your main view, and that's to me how you address it versus living in their framework of all of their grievance and pettiness and hate. He's flipping on it.
You know, I think one of the things that I think one of the reasons why people gravitate to the stuff we do as well is because they leave with the information, and then I think they also leave empowered. And I think folks need to be empowered. They need to feel in control of their lives. And I think a lot of these, young kids right now don't feel in control of their lives. And a lot of it's not their fault, right? I mean, this is the hands that they have been dealt. And it's, through decades and decades and decades, whether it's poor policy or just shifts in global everything, like whatever it is, they're looking at their parents and they're going, well, they had it easy. They were able to get my dad was able to get one job and work, 5 days a week, 8-hour days, and come home and have dinner. And we had 2-week vacations, twice a year. They look and they go, how the heck am I going to do that? Even if I had a job where I was making 6 figures, I'm not going to be able to afford a house. I'm not going to be able to have savings. I'm not going to be able to live in a neighborhood where I could walk around and get everything that I need to survive. And then in doing all that, how am I going to have kids? How am I going to be able to afford a family? I can't even afford to get a coffee for myself, And so these are real issues also. And so what I don't want to do is write off also a lot of this as mere whining and, kind of woe is me, but understand that, people are hurting, going back to what we were saying at the beginning, and that's including these younger generations. And so I think we need to empower them. And I think
also acknowledge
you
their
gotta acknowledge their
anxiety
pain,
and struggle, whoever they may be, right?
And I think we need to, acknowledge it. And, what we've seen in those communities that you've talked about, the manosphere, all that stuff, they've acknowledged it, and then they've directed that anger at the other. You can't afford a home because the Democrats are giving the money to illegal immigrants, and that money should have went to you. And then, the second there's a social program that may actually help people, they go, oh, no, we're not going to pay for that.
Yeah.
That's socialism. That's communism. We're not going to do that. It's like, okay, so you don't believe in any of this, right? But too often that energy is taken and then it's pushed in a negative direction to blame other people for those woes, for those issues. I think we all need to figure out a way as a society in general to how do we empower people, in a productive, positive way. And some of that also is going to require structural change in how are we going to ensure that these kids are going to be able to grow up and have families and have productive lives and have a job that they could support their families with and enjoy the American dream as they've been told. I mean, we were all promised growing up, right? Go to college, you get your good, you get a good job, you'll be good, everything is good, and now that's simply not what's happening in so many cases. So I think there's a bitterness that develops, and that bitterness is then taken and weaponized for bad. And I think we need to kind of figure out how to take that and put people back on the right course.
That's a good segue to my final question, which is, you talk about empowering people, and I get very discouraged about the state of the country, and disappointed and frustrated. And I'm curious. I like the idea, even though some of your YouTube things are like these big bold letters, like the video he doesn't want you to see, or pathetic meltdown, lock him up. It's very kind of, I like it. You're sort of being slightly New York Posty about it, to be honest with you, with the yellow, almost like in your face graphics. But I'm curious if you're optimistic about the country, and what kind of words of encouragement can you give me and other people watching this or listening to this, that we're going to be okay and democracy is not going to go away?
I am hopeful, I am optimistic, and I think that the plan that Trump and Musk had was to pretty much control all levers of everything right now and really beat down any opposition and resistance. I think what we see right now in federal courts is judges appointed by Trump, Reagan, George W. Bush on the due process questions. They made a lot of bad rulings on a lot of things. But on the due process questions, all judges have said, at least as of now of this recording, there is something called due process. You have to go and follow it. And we do not live in an authoritarian country. And so federal judges on that question, by and large across the country, are standing up to Donald Trump. More significantly, though, I think you see the protests, peaceful protests, growing. I think that's a good sign. I think what we saw with the hands-off protests, No King's Day, I think that's going to continue to grow, and that gives me a lot of hope as well. And I think that I take a lot of hope that people are in the fight right now. I was worried that after the election, and you saw a lot of people just for about 2 months
Tuning out, yeah.
tune out and just didn't do anything. I think that we now have a opposition and resistance that looks and feels even stronger than what we saw back in 2017, 2018. I think people have seen Trump's reckless on and off again tariffs and all of this rhetoric that, you know, it's the same kind of pattern. He huffs and he puffs and does something that causes harm, and then he withdraws from it and then declares that a victory. And there are still some news outlets that report these things as victories. It's like he just is the arsonist who slightly put out a fire that he created, and now things are worse, and now he wants to declare that a victory. But I think that the public's, by and large, is seeing that. I mean,
Americans are smart, right? I mean, a lot of them are smart.
Yeah, and I think we see Trump's approval right now is basically the worst in presidential history at this time, including his first term, as you look across the polls. And so he still has that 35% kind of MAGA floor, plus or minus another 5 or 6%. So some polls at 39, some at 42. But by and large, I don't think people like hostile takeovers of the federal government. I think people want to feel safe going on airplanes and not have a transportation secretary kind of panic on TV about flights and staffing and try to blame other people. I think people see veterans getting fired and disrespected. I think people see education being gutted, and I think that people don't like that stuff.
Women dying in parking lots,
I think
too.
absolutely, and I think that people saying, no, we're not okay with this, and that gives me hope.
Even slacktivism, which so-called, sitting on your chair and trying to do something, which was derided for so long,
Yeah.
I think is actually a pretty good barometer of how people are feeling. What they're saying on social media, how they're commenting, and
Yep.
and what they're watching, like the Meidas Network, right? You know.
100%. Yeah, and that's why we always say, do what you can, right? You don't have to go out there and build a media network, right? Like, that's not what we're asking, right? But if your thing is getting your messages out on social media by sending messages, do it. Like,
Or talking to a neighbor and
talk
listening
to a neighbor,
right?
do it. If you're a painter, paint, right? Like whatever it is that you do it and use that to empower yourself also. I think one of the things that I also think about is just how much throughout history, and not even just American history, but in general, there are these big pendulum swings, and they happen quickly. And I think
I've never seen one happen quite this quickly.
that's what I was going to say. I've never seen it happen as quickly as we've seen it happen now. And even since Donald Trump took office to right now, I think we've also seen a tremendous pendulum swing kind of in influx as we are kind of all living in this moment. How this will end, when it will end, what it looks like when we're on the other side, I don't know. That history has not yet been written, but I know that the pendulum always does swing. It doesn't happen on its own, but it happens by collective action and a lot of people staying engaged and in the fight. But I know it will, and that's why when we speak about these fair weather folks who change their opinion based on the way the wind is blowing, I think they may get caught on the wrong side of that pendulum when things swing back to people pushing forward on inclusion, diversity, people championing workers' rights, people championing the ability for people to afford their medication or get their Social Security or,
Right.
or whatever it is. I think there's a breaking point that society reaches, and I think we've kind of did a speed run, to where we are right now, even a speed run to Trump, and now a speed run kind of back, as people are like, oh shit, maybe this wasn't the best idea on the planet.
I did feel like Andy Bashir, who I don't know if you all talked about this, Ben, but he did have a good point about, the Democrats and some progressives, I think, became a little too precious about words and about, shaming or judging or, being self-righteous about framing certain issues to the point where it was like a turnoff for a lot of people. So, I mean, do you agree with that criticism?
Well, I think ultimately, speak how people speak. Don't try to cook up phrases in a lab. Don't try to, come up with euphemisms for things. Or how many times people have also, come to us. You know what? I think you should say, like experts. Maybe instead of saying the language this way, maybe you should say it, this other way. And I'm like, I've never heard somebody use that phrase in my life, though. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Honestly, it sounds like mumbo jumbo. Like,
but Brett, tested 0.3% higher.
Yeah, this tested 0.3% higher. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Okay, like I'm going to talk how I speak with my brothers and how I speak with my friends. You know, and
I know you say what you can have in a group chat, right?
Yeah,
like it's got to be sort of figured out that way. Jordy, bring it home, honey.
Hey, I want to echo your point that you said just before. Americans are smart. Americans are resilient, and it's not going to be easy these next couple of years here, but democracy will prevail. I genuinely have hope. I know from the folks my age, I know where they're sitting at right now, and I know from, folks around Ben and Brett's age and then older, where they're sitting at. People love this country. This country is the greatest country in the world. Americans want this country to succeed. The world wants this country to succeed. And we just have to put our heads down every single day and do the work and make sure that we leave this country better off, not just for our kids, but for the next several generations of kids, hundreds of years down the line, because that's how much this country means to us. And
from the mouths of babes, right? The youngest.
Did he nail it or what?
Yes, you nailed it. You nailed it.
There
Do you guys ever fight, by the way? Do you ever get into big arguments?
Sure.
Huh?
Oh, absolutely.
You do?
But listen, it's not. They're not. It's not like. But they're not like. It's little things. Honestly, like we don't all that much. But if
do you like working together?
Oh, it's the
It's
best.
so fun,
it's
right?
honestly, it's a dream. Like, and I think always growing up, like, we always wanted to work together in some capacity. And like as kids, we would like make movies together. We would make like little action movies or horror movies or mystery movies or whatever. And that that would be like our way of working together. Or we'd play sports, whatever it was. Again, we'd always love doing stuff together. Then there just came a time in life where our age difference, separates you naturally. When Ben's already in college and I'm just starting high school and Jordy's in middle school, whatever that is, or I'm a senior in high school, Jordy's just starting, as a freshman in high school. And luckily I set the stage to make sure everybody likes Jordan coming in. And, but there's always these kind of
that you live up to Ben's
that I live up to Ben, who was
right?
this school president and teacher's
pet.
pet.
Teacher's pet, yeah.
It's a ridiculous award.
You won it, though.
Real award. Real award.
It was
what? A teacher's pet
Teacher's
award?
pet,
Right there.
What?
Class of 20.
What do they call him?
No.
Biggest suck up?
They-
Senior suck up?
That's him right here.
Focus on the student government president.
Well, I have to say, this is officially the longest podcast
Wow.
I've ever done,
right.
but it felt like the shortest. Thank you
That's
guys
such a compliment. Thank you.
so much. This was such a fun conversation. I learned a lot and just really enjoyed getting to know all three of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much
It was
for
great to
having
be
us.
here, and we did grow up watching you. And
Yeah,
so,
I know Ben said it. We are such massive admirers of
Yeah.
yours, so
Aw,
it's truly an
thank you.
honor. So for this to be, the first show that we're actually in person on together, it's not by accident, and we're really grateful, for that, and we're just so thrilled to be here with you. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm not
you
just
guys.
saying that because I'm the teacher's pet. I'm not trying to suck up to you.
You see how he won the award.
I'm genuinely.
That was great.